Hello, solution seekers and change makers. It is such a delight to be back with you on the Yes, We Rise podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about 10 strategies to creatively fund your collaborative. Now, a lot of the collaboratives that we work with have a wide range of ways that they do the work and ways that they sustain themselves through different funding. That funding landscape has changed a lot in recent months, particularly at the federal level, and we're often asked how networks and collaboratives can develop innovative and creative funding strategies, especially for long-term change-making work. As many of you know, you solution seekers and change makers yourselves, work of creating change takes time. It's not an overnight prospect, but how do you keep funding the work when it does often take years, but funders often want to fund something new? At the same time, if there's a federal funding freeze or a loss of funding, if a foundation folds, what are some innovative strategies that you can use to keep the work going, including getting scrappy, being nimble, and thinking outside of the box? In this episode of the Yes, We Rise podcast, I'll talk about the intentional approach that we use at our firm, Dialogue and Design Associates, in working with collaboratives, how to cultivate long-term networks, and ideas to creatively fund those networks when faced with a crossroads moment, including a shift in funding sources. Creating a path forward and how a collaborative can adjust and support themselves when faced with significant change is key. And there are several important questions to ask during seasons of change for collaboratives. We've also identified 4 key models that networks and collaboratives use in their long-term work. And you can learn more about those key questions and those models in a previous episode of the podcast, episode 48, all about building resilient networks and sustaining long-term collaboratives. Now, we do have some exciting things in the works, and stay tuned to learn more about ways that we're continuing to support collaboratives. We've also identified 3 core domains for networks to use in building resilience and lasting success. And we're going to focus on the third one today, funding. But it's important to know the overall context and ways that we've seen the 3 key elements for how those networks can build resilience and lasting success. The first one is around collaboration, how to do the work together. That includes things like governance and structure, decision-making processes, how to build relationships and trust, who's participating and engaging over time, and welcoming new folks. The nuts and bolts of how the collaborative works itself, including things like the mission, vision, values, and goals, and how those things can shift and change over time. Finally, around collaboration, it includes evaluation and iteration, building team culture, capacity, and peer learning. The second one is action, which is what people love. It's what keeps people engaged, and that includes implementation, coordinating those actions together so that people can cross-pollinate ideas and make their work more effective, sharing ideas and resources and bringing in new ideas, and implementing actions across teams and groups. Finally, funding, and that includes identifying long-term funding sources from multiple streams with the potential for self-generation of revenue, innovative ideas, and creative partnerships. And we're going to go into those today. So creating a sustainable funding model with diversified funding sources that is not reliant on a single funding source or organization for doing the work, for implementation, and the ongoing collaborative work is really essential. A few other best practices include developing a budget. What do you need for a year's work to happen or for 3 years' work to happen? So creating an annual budget based on what those activities are that talk about the collaborative's projects and needs, including core costs and needs for basic operation or expenses such as staff time, food for meetings, meeting rental costs, equipment costs, facilitation, and how you're going to fund that implementation and action. Lastly, creating an open budget process with the steering committee or a decision-making body for your collaborative can be a really key way to keep a collaborative transparent, for people to understand the money flowing in and flowing out, and to understand what the needs for funding are. So an open budget process, that might just be creating a simple PDF once a quarter or once a season of what the funding needs are and how things are funding, and sharing that with your steering committee, talking about it. And it can certainly be more detailed than that, but it depends on what the capacity is of the convener, agency, organization, or community group that's doing the work. But just keeping things open and transparent about money fosters transparency and trust. And that's really key. Those 2 factors, relationships and trust, that's what moves the needle. So we often use decision making that is consensus based with our steering committees, and we found that when they make decisions about the budgets for the long term by consensus, they have a greater sense of investment and trust in the collaborative as a whole. So now, how do you fund those collaboratives for the long term, particularly in times of big changes and shift? Funding collaboratives through diverse and innovative strategies can enhance not only the sustainability, impact, but also the longevity of those networks. And here are 10 creative approaches. First, and check out the show notes for links to relevant groups where we mention them. So first, create multiple sources of funding. Building a diversified funding base for stability if funding shifts is essential. Just like a stool with at least 3 legs, a collaborative should have at least 3 legs or bases of support. If one goes, there'll be others in place to keep the work moving forward until shifts can be made to stabilize funding. Even better, 4 legs, 5 legs, 6 legs, maybe it's a bench. But think about ways to create a multi-pronged source of support. And it doesn't have to be only money. You can think about ways to get scrappy and do the work with volunteers if funding shifts, or ways to keep a website going, ways to meet up informally and have a potluck. But think about ways to keep the momentum going, because things will invariably shift. That happens in every long-term collaborative. So as you're cultivating multiple sources of funding, maintain a list of ready-to-fund projects if partners or agencies have surplus funds from a grant or a funding source that needs to be spent down in a time-sensitive manner. It happens all the time. Folks are like, I have 15,000 extra bucks I need to spend in the next month. Does anybody have ideas? If you have that list ready to roll, you can often plug in quickly. The Upper and Middle James Riparian Consortium is one example of a project, and that project is one we facilitate in Central and Western Virginia that has developed a resilient collaborative model over the last few years. And the group has worked to identify different funding streams to be able to pivot as needed. You can learn more about them at jamesriverconsortium.org. The second strategy is a fairly traditional one, but there are a lot of different threads within it, and we're just going to hit the high level. Grant funding and foundations. So cultivating funding prospects from private sources and grants, including local, state, and federal agencies and sources, and build long-term relationships with those funders. Funders, particularly at foundations and program managers, are people too, and they want to know about you and your story. And they can often be a great resource to pick up the phone and give them a ring if something shifts significantly. They might have ideas for short-term support if a federal funding source changes, for example. You might consider contacting a foundation to see if you can set up a brief info session or take a program manager out for coffee. Some other specific ideas and examples include, at the state level, consider specific outreach to heads of agencies, secretariats, or leaders within the state level leadership. They often want to know what's happening within communities and boots on the ground. It's what connects them to the work, and let them know about your work. Make sure you're connecting. Consider sector-focused private trusts for grants, sponsorships, and donations. And third, in-kind contributions. Often collaboratives don't track their in-kind. So if you have a volunteer day, have a volunteer sign-in sheet so you can track who came, how much time did they spend there, and then you can use that as in-kind contributions and match for grants. It's a really important thing to do. It's pretty simple. There is often a federal volunteer rate that you can use, so definitely track those in-kind contributions. It can also be other non-monetary support, such as donated goods, services, or volunteer time to help offset expenses. Now, there's an interesting example about how to visualize federal funding that we wanted to share from a network that we've looked at in the past. The REAMP network is an example of, in the Midwest, in how it uses both collaborative strength, organizational structure, and guiding principles to reach their mission, which is to set collective strategy and enable collaboration on climate solutions in the Midwest. Now, their North Star goal is to equitably eliminate greenhouse gas emissions in the Midwest by 2050. And finally, their motto is think systematically and act collaboratively. They have over 130 nonprofit organizations and foundations. Each have different areas of strength and approaches, and they work collaboratively together. So one specific tool that they've developed is called Visualize Federal Funding Map. And this was last updated in July of 2024. So as of the recording of this in early 2025, that's going to look different today, but it is a really fascinating visual. And they created it to simplify the complicated funding landscape. And it helps visualize the flow of federal funds, individual grants, and who can apply and expiration dates. And it looks kind of like a mind map with related circles and routes, and it's beautiful. So check out their website or show notes to learn more at the Reamp Network. So the third strategy is to show yourself to others, elevate yourself. Get the word out about your collaborative or network for support, volunteers, and to help solicit donations. And again, it's not just about money. If federal funding has impacted your collaborative or network now, then consider simplifying. Think about just meeting around a kitchen table with your committee, your action team, your steering committee, or planning group. Someone could bring a pot of chili, someone else can bring some bread, and someone else can bring the salad, and just talk about how you want to get the work done, how you want to roll up your sleeves and get the work done. In times of shifts and change, simplifying, showing up, and doing the work together is a great way to continue the work and momentum without always chasing dollars. And it often breathes some fresh air and life into the collaboratives when you focus on simplicity and getting work done. Now, at the same time, showcasing your story about your collaborative, about the successes of your networks through different communication channels, such as your website, brochures, on partner website, and during in-person events is absolutely key. Share the story of your network and particularly the value add of the collaboratives to partners and the collective work and efforts in many ways, maybe on podcast, on other partners' websites and other outreach channels. Now, this is something that is really key, and it's something we've heard time and time again in collaboratives, that there's a value add for partners in participating in the work. How does it make partners' lives easier by participating? Sometimes we've heard it's because they know who to call when they have a problem, or to troubleshoot an idea, or to celebrate a win. The collective is more effective. We've experienced that time and time again, and collective work is often messy, but showing up, doing the work together, and showcasing those successes as well as challenges with others helps people know about your work. So you've got to show yourself and elevate yourself to be able to get the support, volunteers, in-kind donations. Really, one goal is to try to make sure everybody on your street knows about your transportation plan that you're working on to get more pedestrian routes or bike routes in place, as one example. Or if you're working at the regional scale, make sure that all the regional nonprofits in your sector know what your network is up to. Consider ways to get the word out, like tabling at farmers markets, giving talks at schools, putting billboards up, ads on community or public radio, and sending press releases to area newspapers. Word of mouth is one of the best ways to get the word out, including at community events, parades, paddle days on the river, or at lobby days and receptions, if your organization is able to participate in that. Finally, develop and promote new outreach and promotional materials, press releases, sharing the impacts and metrics of your work with existing and new partners in the network. Get the word out within your network and outside of your network. So you're looking in and looking out. It can be pretty simple. Finally, develop a way for donations to be accepted on your network's website during meetings or events such as summits or other community gatherings. Fourth, consider innovative and out-of-the-box funding sources. Create new partnerships and do shared fundraising. So this is innovation and working together. You might create new events such as an animal balloon tying competition or a kite flying festival to raise awareness. And maybe there's a donation box next to those. Maybe you're handing out flyers. Think outside of the box. Think about new ways to go about this. And there are a lot of different ways you can go about it. Just try experimenting and see what works with out of the box thinking, events, and ways to get funding. One example of this is a Charlottesville, Virginia-based nonprofit organization called the Rivanna Conservation Alliance. They do a lot of different work around the Rivanna River in Charlottesville, Virginia, surrounding counties, as well as across the state, around improving water quality, but they do it in a number of different ways. They have river rallies where people can race on the river. They have volunteer stream events. They do invasive plant removals, and they've done a lot of free tree giveaways and recently invasive plant volunteer days, which double as an opportunity to learn about the work of the Rivanna Conservation Alliance, as well as many of the partner organizations. They put the signs of all the different partners working together on signs at parks where that invasive plant management is taking place. So not only do people understand what's happening with the plant removal and why there might be some plants or trees gone and new ones being planted, what the name of the project is, who's being involved, and how people can get involved. It's a great way to both do the work innovatively, creatively, showcase partners, and getting the work done in an innovative and cost-effective way. And you can learn more about the Rivanna Conservation Alliance at rivannariver.org. The fifth strategy out of 10 is corporate partnerships. And you can collaborate with aligned businesses for sponsorships, joint venues, or in-kind support. And alliances like this can provide financial resources and expertise where it's appropriate and where it's a value add. And we've seen some really amazing examples of corporate partnerships where it's aligned. Sixth, membership models. And this is a really great opportunity, and it's untapped often in networks and collaboratives. Implementing tier membership structures where individuals or organizations can pay dues in exchange for benefits, creating a sense of ownership and steady income, can be really helpful. You can have a free way that a group can join, or if there is an entity that has the capacity to be able to contribute a lot, having a sliding scale is a great way to enable multiple members to join in a membership model. Seventh, fee-for-service offerings. And this is yet another untapped strategy that we haven't seen collaboratives and network use nearly as much as they could. Develop services or products that generate revenue, such as training programs, workshops, or consulting services. Creating business ventures related to the collaborative's mission to generate income, such as selling merchandise or intellectual property, is a really fascinating way to go. And one organization who's doing this, again, another example from Charlottesville, Virginia, is the Love No Ego. One example from Charlottesville, Virginia, who's doing this is the Love No Ego Foundation. They have 4 different pillars: spirituality, exercise, education, and community, and they help ignite the intuitions of youth while bringing awareness and recognition of different behaviors that might limit their human productivity. They have 3 different program areas: motivational speaking, mentoring, and workshops. And while their funding does come from some traditional sources, such as grants, there are some non-traditional sources that are also very important: speaking events, the actual partnering and programming, the mentoring. And a lot of those are free for people to access, but where speaking events can be paid or other programs, it all helps support this nonprofit organization that's working in partnership with many other organizations and entities collaboratively towards the overarching goal of youth development. And learn more at lovenoego.org. It's a really awesome organization. 8th is to crowdfund campaigns. And there are all kinds of amazing platforms that can be used to raise funds for specific projects, engaging a broader audience, and building community support. You can also do things like Patreon, where you have different perks for people who are creating things. It might be a tree planting campaign that people can contribute to. Maybe they get a free plant guide as a perk. There are a lot of different creative ways to do crowdfunding campaigns, and it makes it accessible for individual people to be able to contribute. I saw a recent example from England where they were trying to purchase the town tavern, and they created a funding campaign to be able to have donations from around the globe contribute towards this tavern, and they had almost reached their goal. It was a really beautiful example of community generated support for a community institution where they had not only, food and drink, but they had knitting, they had community gatherings, they had speaking bureaus, they had farmer events. So it was a real community hub, and they used a community-based approach to generate those needed funds to keep it going. 9th, innovative funding sources. We've talked about a couple ones, but some additional ones include social impact bonds. You can partner with investors to provide upfront capital for social projects with returns paid by the outcomes achieved, aligning financial and social returns. Now, there are a lot of different examples of that. Things like carbon credits, nutrient trading credits. There are a lot of different funding sources, but there are different social impact bonds that partners have used. One simple starting point is to create a slide deck or slides about your work and invite an investor to a meeting with you. You don't know unless you try. You don't know unless you ask. And while it might seem like a scary venture, just doing it scared is a helpful starting point just to get rolling. And second, community investment funds or community foundations. Establishing funds where community members can invest in local projects is a phenomenal mechanism to keep funds local and support community-driven projects. It also helps foster local community engagement and financial support. Last, develop collaborative grant applications. Join forces with other organizations to apply for grants or for corporate sponsorships where it's aligned, crowdfunding campaigns, but work together to apply for funding resources, to pool resources and expertise to increase the likelihood of funding. A neat example of this is the Lancaster Clean Water Partners, and they are based in Pennsylvania, Lancaster County, and they have a clear call for partner organizations to join their work. They share grant-making resources, guidelines for participation, and it's a real value add, but they really get into the nuts and bolts, sharing grant-making resources with those partner organizations. And you can learn more at lancastercleanwaterpartners.com. So there are 10 creative strategies to fund your collaborative, and a lot of different examples that talk about how and demonstrate how collaborative networks can sustain long-term impact and work through diversified and innovative funding strategies. So we would love to hear what's working for you, what challenges you're facing, and what ideas you have. Share your ideas with us on social or in the comments, and check out the links at the webpage, yeswerise.org, to learn more about the organizations we've shared today. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share the episode so we can continue sharing episodes far and wide. So be well, change makers and solution seekers. Thank you for the work you do in the world to make it a brighter place. And thank you for joining the Yes We Rise podcast.